Hey friends, welcome to week 3 of this special season of the Connected Mom podcast, where we're going through the book Cultivating Deeper Connections in a Lonely World. And if you're doing a book club, I hope that these videos are inspiring you to have conversations with your family and your friends, all wrapped around the concept of how do we develop closer connections with each other? And so this week, we're on to the topic of letting go of a critical spirit. Because if anything hinders our close relationships, it's that of a critical spirit. Let me start with a story. Years ago in our very first church, Steve and I think we were like 21, maybe 22. Anyway, Steve is the pastor of this church, and there was a woman in the church who had decided that her life's calling was to help grow up Steve and I. Now, you can imagine how awkward this was at times. And so Sunday morning, she would come to church with this huge reel-to-reel tape recorder, and she would tape Steve's sermons. And Sunday night, she would come back and tell him everything he had done wrong in his morning sermon. He really thought I was not a believer because I wore nail polish and she didn't like my shoes and I wore makeup, and she just didn't think that those were godly characteristics for a pastor's wife. Well, Steve and I really wrestled with this because it was wearing Steve's down. And we prayed a lot and we sought older counsel from people. And what we discovered when we went to other pastors in the area is that this woman had been to all different churches. And in every church, it was the same. She would be critical towards the pastor, towards the leadership, always feeling like she was God's answer to growing them up. Well, Steve prayed about it, and first of all, he canceled the Sunday evening service because he thought, okay, I'm not going to have her coming back every Sunday night telling me everything I did wrong. So we canceled the evening service, but still, that didn't solve the problem. Finally, Steve went to her with one of his deacons and said, okay, we have a problem here because you keep criticizing everybody. What do you think we should do about your problem? And she said, I think I need to leave your church. I don't think she thought it was a place where we really honored God, probably in part because I kept wearing nail polish. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. She did leave the church. As I think back about that woman, I realized she was extremely lonely. Come to find out, her husband had committed suicide. She didn't have a lot of friends. And looking back, all of that makes sense to me. Because think about it. Do you want to be friends with somebody who's always going to be finding fault with you? Do you want to be in a marriage with somebody who's always finding fault with you? Do you want to have close relationships with your neighbors if they're always pointing out your weaknesses? Listen, Scripture calls Satan the accuser. In the book of Revelation, it tells us that Satan lives to accuse the brethren. That's his full-time job. We are never more like Satan than when we are accusing each other. Jesus doesn't accuse us. He offers us grace and compassion. In the book of Ephesians, Paul offers this counsel for developing deeper connections. He says, be kind and compassionate to one another. Kindness and compassion are like twin sisters. The difference is compassion is really having a soft heart towards somebody, recognizing if they're in relationship with you, they're going to bring their faults, their idiosyncrasies, their, mistakes. And kindness is really taking action on your compassion. So offering the other person grace can be an act of kindness. We want to keep soft parts in our relationships, and letting go of a critical spirit is extremely important if you're going to have good friends, if you're going to have a good marriage. I mean, anybody who's married knows this, right? The minute you get married and after you have gone past the wedding and the honeymoon, you're going to begin to see each other's faults. And if you bring a critical spirit into that marriage, your marriage is not going to go great, right? And it's the same with your friendships. And so we've got to find ways to let go of having a critical attitude. Now, you might be wondering, what's the difference between discernment and judgment? I mean, certainly as believers, we have to have discernment. Yes, you're right. We do have to have discernment. We have to know the difference between what's right and wrong based on scripture. Judgment, though, is when we pick up a stone and we throw it towards somebody else because they're not obeying the rules of scripture. And that is not helpful. That's going to put distance in your relationship, and it's going to land you in the wilderness of loneliness faster than any other habit. I remember being out with an acquaintance for coffee one time, and she ran down everybody that I knew and found fault with them all. By the end of that coffee, I was feeling really anxious because I'm like, okay, if she's saying this about everybody else, what is she saying about me, right? And so we have to give up this critical spirit. How do we do this? We start by rediscovering the beauty of empathy. Paul writes in Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. This is the beauty of empathy. It's saying to another person, your feelings make sense to me. Even if you don't agree with how they're feeling on a particular issue, it's fine to say your feelings make sense to me and offer them empathy rather than criticism. So when your spouse messes up, rather than pointing out his weakness, say, you know what? Your feelings and even your actions make sense to me. I probably would have done the same thing. Or I understand why you forgot my birthday, or I understand why you forgot our anniversary, or I understand how stressed out you are, and that's why you came across a little sharp last night. I get it, And so we offer the people that we're close to empathy, and then rediscover that the act of kindness. Do something kind for somebody when you're tempted to criticize them. Rather than criticizing your neighbor for never pulling their garbage cans back after the garbage pickup, maybe go over and pull it back for them. And then resign as the truth police. Man, I want to spend a couple of minutes here. Have you ever known somebody that you're in close relationship with that is the self-appointed truth police? This happens all the time in marriage, right? Somebody starts to tell a story and their spouse says, oh, no, it happened actually like this. And they dive into being the truth police. Can I just tell you that being the truth police is not helping your closeness with your spouse or anybody else? So resign as the truth police. If somebody tells a story and they don't get all the facts right, it's okay. It's probably not going to matter for time and eternity. So let it go and offer grace instead. And then finally, don't assume that you know the motives of other people. We do this all the time. We make meaning in our heads when somebody does something. We think, wow, they're just trying to do X, Y, or Z. The truth is, you don't know their motives. They might just be having a hard day. They might just be caught up in something else. Don't assume you know another person's motives, because the truth is you don't know their motives. And if you think you do, you're going to be quick to criticize them. As I think about my life, there have been too many times where I've been critical of other people. And now I just say, Lord, forgive me for that. I don't want to be like that. Listen, when I die and go home with Jesus, I want to be remembered for somebody who offered grace. I want to offer grace to my husband. I want to offer grace to my kids, my adult kids. I want to offer grace to my grandkids. I want to offer grace in my friendships, in my neighborhood. I want to be known as a grace giver because the truth is that's who Jesus is. He is the ultimate grace giver. And he calls those of us who follow him to offer his compassion, his soft heart to others, and his kindness to others, his acts of goodwill towards others. He calls us to follow in his footsteps and to let go of criticism. I want to challenge you today. I want you to think back on the last week. Maybe if you're married, think back on your marriage over the last week. If you're single, think back on maybe your friendships or your relationship with your coworkers. If you're a mom, think back over the last week in your relationship with your kids. If you're an older mom, think back on the relationship with your adult children. And I want you to ask yourself this question. Did I criticize this last week? Did I point out something that was wrong with somebody? And could I have offered grace instead? And then if you're doing this book study, this book club in a group, I want you to have a conversation and I want you to think back on your life. Have you ever seen anybody's behavior changed because they were criticized? I honestly haven't. I think even back when we were raising our kids, if we criticized them and pointed out everything they were doing wrong, that really didn't motivate a change in behavior. Now, sometimes a consequence did, but instead what motivated them is when we pointed out something they were doing right and pointed them towards more compassionate and kind behavior. That went a lot farther than pointing out all their faults. It's the same in your life and mine. Rarely does somebody change because they've been criticized. But talk about that in your group and then develop like maybe a code where you're going to remind yourself not to be critical, but instead to offer kindness and compassion. I hope you're enjoying this summer book club. You might be doing it as a spring book club or a winter book club, and that's fine. But I find that we grow the most when we have deep conversations with people and we process what we've read. So I hope these short videos have encouraged you to process what you read in the book and to process how God might want you to change. Thanks for joining me this week, and I hope you're staying with your book club. Join me next week where we're going to be talking about loyalty and friendship. Thanks for joining us today. And hey, if you like this, would you share it with a friend and encourage them to also join and do a book club through the Connected Mom podcast? Thanks for joining us today.